short straw today. What a lovely gospel to hear. It probably, when you hear it, say, Jesus, what are you actually saying? And every time this gospel comes around every 3 years, I ask myself that same question. Jesus, what happened to you? It's not the Jesus that I seem to know, but of course I have studied this gospel so many times that I've realized the best way of understanding Jesus' parable is by telling another story. And the story I'm going to share with you is one that many of you probably have heard of. In fact, you might have read the book or seen the movie. I'm talking about the 1993 Steven Spielberg movie, Schindler's List. Now, if you have not seen Schindler's List, I do encourage you, highly encourage you, to go home and check for it on demand or go to the library and get it. It is one of those must-watch movies that I believe every single person in the world needs to see. But the story revolves around Oskar Schindler right after the Nazi invasion and takeover of Poland. Oskar Schindler was a German businessman whose main concern, his only concern, was how he could make money for himself profiting from the war, because of course during war things have to be made and somebody has to make it, and Oskar Schindler felt that he was the guy of anybody that could do it. But he knew the only way for this to happen was for him to schmooze, to bribe, to give gifts, to having lavish meals with the Nazi leadership. And when you do that enough, when you become buddies, we all know what happens. You scratch my back, I scratch your back. You know, pay to play. We hear about that in the news a lot. And because he was so persistent in his shrewdness, Oskar Schindler was able, in Krakow, to open a factory to make ceramics. You can go to Krakow today and see the exact same factory. Of course, he needed labor. And since labor was difficult, he got the labor where he knew he could get it from. And for him, that was to, once again, bribe, scratch the back of the Nazi leadership, and get 100% free labor in the Jews who were living in the Krakow ghetto. He didn't care as long as they did their work. He didn't care that he was using other people to make money, that he was being funded from these same people's goods and dollars that were taken away from them. All he was concerned about was how much he could make for himself. But then something happened. And you see this in the book, and Schindler, Spielberg plays it perfectly in the movie. The movie is in all black and white for except 2 scenes. The first scene is when the Nazis empty the ghetto. and moved people to a concentration/death camp. And Schindler, when he is there, notices a young girl in a red dress. And for some wonderful reason, it finally dawned on him what he was doing. That it had been all about him up until that moment, because he had dehumanized his workers, just as the Nazis asked him to do. And he set about to try to ensure that at least his workers would still be available to work for him. Of course, many of the people who left the ghetto were immediately brought to the gas chambers, including that girl in the red. One day, while Schindler was driving or walking, he looked over, and the other color moment is you see the dead girl lying in a pile of bodies, wearing her red dress. Schindler realized it wasn't about him. He could have all the money in the world, but in the end, it meant nothing. What really it meant was the lives of the people who were working for him. And with the help of his secretary and the continual bribing of officers, he was able to rescue over 1,000 human beings of the Jewish faith tradition, and who were alive because of the fact that he realized that he had a choice whether to serve himself, money, mammon, or whether to serve God through Christ. To this day, you can go to Israel and see Schindler's tomb. The Holocaust Museum in Israel, Yad Vashem, have labeled Schindler to be a righteous Gentile. A man, although not Jewish, who did the right thing. You know, we in our lives, we are so filled with consumerism, with getting the next big toy, with finding the next bigger model of a tablet or an iPad or an iPhone or a Samsung phone, which might literally blow up on you. But none of that matters. Oh yeah, somebody might look at you and say, oh, look at Mr. Smith. Look at how much money he has. Look at how much power he has. But you know what? In God's eyes, if he only is using that for himself, God remembers that. God will see that. Versus the person who, whether they have money or not, will use what they have for the betterment of their fellow human being. The Microsoft founder, Bill Gates, he did that. he realized, with the help of his friend Warren Buffett, that he had more money than he ever needed, ever. And so he resigned from Microsoft. He set up the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He gave the vast majority of his wealth to that foundation. Sure, he's sitting pretty, but more than 90% of his income that he had, he gave away. Now others can experience life and wholeness because of his recognition that serving God, serving our fellow human beings, is much more important than serving himself. Ask yourself this question before you run to the store or to the mall or to Amazon. A, do you really need what you're about to buy? B, do you need to spend that much on what you're about to buy? And C, what would happen if you would take a little about that money and give it away in order that others might know that they're loved? As Jesus said, we can't serve both God and wealth. Our question that we need to be left with today is, who are you and I serving? Amen.